Maroon Spirit 954. Today is November 25th, 2019. As we close out the last fiscal quarter of 2019 on the 400th year milestone of the American black under the European legal construct of slavery, 1619 to 2019. Tonight's Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote states the following: Negroes must become like English gentlemen who study the law of the land, not because they intend to practice the profession, but because every gentleman should know the law. In the interpretation of the law by the courts, too, all the rights of the Negroes in this country are involved, and a larger number of us must qualify for this important service. We may have too many lawyers of the wrong kind, but we have not our share of the right kind. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Tonight's Black Inventor, Mr. Thomas L. Jennings Byrd, invented improvement in car couplings. Federal patent number 157370, December 1st, 1874. For those that are unaware of what a car coupling is, that's how you have trains with multiple cars linked to each other on a railroad. The device that couples those cars together to make a train with the engine at the front and the caboose on the end and those cars attached in the middle, the car coupling is what attaches those multiple cars or carts. Thomas L. Jennings Byrd also invented the improvement in neck yokes for wagons. Federal patent number 126181, April 30th, 1872. Of course, that neck yoke is going to refer to the horse that would pull carriages in that time. Mr. Thomas L. Jennings Byrd also invented the apparatus detaching horses from carriages. Federal patent number 124790, March 13th, 1872. Tonight's definitions, or today's definitions. The first definition: school, any institution at which instruction is given in a particular discipline. Education, an enlightening experience. American, noun, a native or citizen of the United States. Descendants, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. Slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Treaty, an agreement formally signed, ratified, or adhered to between two nations or sovereigns. Reparations, the act of making an amends for a wrong. Maroon historical points. Point 1. Their black skin made them easy targets to identify, so black became a badge of bondage. Point 2. Were Maroons and Black Americans escaping slavery or breaking the law? Point 3. Outlaw slave colonies were called Maroon colonies. Point 4. Maroon leaders were first and foremost military officers. Point 5. Maroons paid a small agriculture tax to be used for common defense. The 12 steps of recovery for the American black descendants of slavery. This is a 13-week practical program of action for each American descendant of slavery. Step 1. Learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. Step 2. Who established that estate? Step 3. What nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European? Step 4. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend what's your position on reparations. Step 5. They either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, and 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. Step 6. Don't support European holidays for the remainder of the year. Step 7. Avoid spending money with any small business that doesn't hire your people. Step 8. All businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American black businesses. Step 9. All other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. Step 10. The United States government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The U.S. dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971. The government operates off the full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the United States government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. Step 11. Teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. Subsection A. Have them learn about a black inventor. Subsection B. Have them know about our heroes. Subsection C. They should know the European that conquered the estate you live in. Subsection D. They should know the nation of people prior to European invasion, militarily and culturally. Step 12. Practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming, America, and attaches us to the history and laws of the United States government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This in 13 weeks, one fiscal quarter, will bring us together for our common cause. So here we are in week 9, the last fiscal week of the month of November. And we're going to do a recap of the time period between 1850 to 1860. The first point in the recap: before the Civil War, slaveholders tried to nail down and secure this sick system of chattel slavery by paying 7 cents an hour to armed patrols to scour the countryside every night. So European peasants that were put on ships and sent from Europe to North America, when they landed in the New World, once the plantation system was up and running in any of the original 13 colonies, they immediately had work. And the work that was readily available for them was slave patrol. Next point. 1860, slavery had become a major part of life for the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Creek nations. We really have to understand, when we say nation, what that means. The United States government is a nation. It has commerce. It trades products around the world, and it has a military, and it has a government structure. It has a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and an executive branch. Understand that the confederations that were on this land prior to the European, that is the way that they ran their nations. Remember, Europeans coming from Europe were under one-person rulerships, kings and queens. So when they say the New World, not only was it new land, different crops could be grown on that land, it was also a different group of people that they encountered and went to war against that ran or governed their people completely different than where they came from in Europe. So the Choctaw Nation, the Chickasaw Nation, the Cherokee Nation, and the Creek Nation, slavery had become a major part of their life. Next point. Slavery transformed these Native American nations from fishing and hunting to tilling huge plantation labor. So their whole concept about life had done a 360-degree change over time and through many wars on this land. Native Americans, slavery overall wasn't as hardcore as the Europeans' version. So Native American nations that would enslave Black Americans or Black Americans who descend from the legal construct of slavery, their form of it wasn't as harsh or medieval as the Europeans' version of chattel slavery. Some slaves, depending on the nation, could work, get money, and pay off their debt for freedom. Chattel slavery under the European was for life. And in 2019, that term is not unfamiliar to us, especially those of Generation X, really even the baby boomer generation and the millennials. We've heard a lot of our people receiving life sentences for various acts of crime, allegedly. But life sentences have been going on for 400 years. Welcome to chattel slavery. Europeans didn't like the leniency these native nations practiced with bondage. All right, so it wasn't enough that the European was able to impress their culture on 4 to 5 of the nations that were native to this land. They wanted it practiced exactly the way they had intended for chattel slavery to be practiced. So this is going to cause a problem between the Native Americans within their respective nations and the Europeans who have now established the United States government on this land through military occupation. Native American nations had slave codes, in specific the Cherokee. Chickasaws had a bad reputation as slave owners. So Cherokee had slave codes, but the Chickasaws were very low down with their system of slavery within their nation. Native American slave codes. The first, control the men and women. The second code, prevented learning to read and write. The third code, if escape was attempted, other members would assist in catching them. So we can see a blueprint hundreds of years ago that was practiced within Native American nations that still applies to today. Control the men and women, prevent learning to read and write. If escape was attempted, other members would assist in catching them. The next point, the Civil War pitted brother against brother within the Native American nations. So not only are the Native American nations practicing enslavement of Black Americans on this land, they also are having an internal fight within the nation. The next point, mixed bloods committed to slavery clash with full bloods and their Black Maroon allies. So the mixed bloods who had European and Native American within their family tree. They were clashing against the full bloods, who were the Native Americans that were marrying and reproducing with other Black Americans or Americans that were escaping the legal construct of slavery. The next point. 1861, Indian Territory was surrounded by the Confederacy and flooded with its agents. So by the early 1960s, the Confederacy has surrounded Indian Territory and put agents within the nation, which is where you're getting your mixed bloods within these Native American nations. Also, Confederacy. Understand that by 1861, there are two European governments in North America. You have the United States government, which is also known as the Union, and you have the Confederate States of America, which is also known as the rebels. Keep that concept in your mind as we walk through. Most federal agents in Native American territory favored slavery and the Confederacy. So your federal agents are coming out of the United States government, also known as the Union. They were down with the program of slavery and sided with the Confederacy. Understand that. They're on the same page, even though they've got two separate governments at this particular point in American history. Confederate officials arrived to control operations, but U.S. government was nowhere in sight. All right, so Confederate officials from those states that have formed their own government, which was the Confederate States of America, they put their agents within these Native American nations to ensure that you were practicing chattel slavery the way we intended it to. And they were also monitoring the profitability within these Native American nations from their slave workers. Yeah, they're overseeing the day-to-day operations. They know how much you're spending on a day-to-day basis. They know how much you're making. They know how much profit, right? They're doing the math on you. They're doing the accounting. And they're also making sure that you're not allowing these Black Americans to buy their freedom or earn money. Yeah, they're all in your business. This is the 1860s. The Confederate officials are all in the Native Americans' business that are practicing the legal construct of slavery within their nation. When Fort Sumter surrendered in April, Chickasaws and Choctaws had signed treaties with the Confederacy. All right, so understand the Confederacy was its own nation. We understand that now. So now the Chickasaws and Choctaws are going into treaties with this newly formed government. This has nothing to do with the United States government in the treaties that these nations have signed with the United States government. These are new treaties they're entering into with the Confederacy. August of the same year, leaders of the Native American nations allied with their members to the new Confederacy. All right, so these Native American nations, they're now a part of the new Confederation. Now, when you go back and you read up on this, they're going to talk about the 11 states that Europeans were operating and controlling. You'll hear about the 7 states that succeeded from the United States government, but they never really go into detail about those Native American nations that also joined with them. Native Americans and Maroons who were neutral sided with the Union. All right, so you did have Native American nations on this land, which were most of them were west of the Mississippi River, because remember, in the early 1860s and 1850s, the European was unaware of what was west of the Mississippi River. He was unaware at that time. right? Now, they did have the Indian Removal Act in 1830, and that went on for about 20 years. However, they thought that they were sending those Native American nations into no man's land. So they knew nothing about what was going on west of the Mississippi River. So the nations that were west of the Mississippi River, they were pretty much neutral. This was new to them, seeing this type of operation going down on the land known as North America. They were like, I don't know what y'all got going on, enslaving people and all of that. We'll roll with the Union, not understanding that the Union was down with the same program as well. Let's get into that. The last point, Cherokees, Creeks, and Seminoles were told by Confederate officials there ain't no more United States government and ain't any more treaty. All be dead. All right, so understand all the agreements that the Native Americans had went into with the United States government. Here you have the Confederate States of America. They're saying we don't acknowledge those treaties, which they have every right to do so because they form their own government. So now the Native American nations have to go into new treaties with the Confederate States of America. So that brings us to where we are now, 1861. The stage is set. You've got the United States government, which was originally 13 colonies. Those 13 colonies declared their independence from rulers in Europe, and those colonies turned into estates or trusts. Going through 100-year worth of wars with the runaways from slavery in Florida and the American Black Seminole Nation, there's a divide within the United States government, which is where we get the Confederation of the United States. So as we get into the Emancipation Proclamation, let's understand we've got two separate governments at this point. From a European standpoint, we've got the United States government and we've got the Confederacy of the United States. Now get a pen or a pencil and write this down. Let's get a clear understanding of the estates that were in the Confederacy. Initially, it was 7 of them. South Carolina, South Carolina had to be in there because that was a major import colony and then estate where a lot of human trafficking took place. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Those were the first estates to say, you know what? We're going to separate from the United States government and we're going to have our own operating agreement. We're going to do business on this land the way we see fit. A little later on, you get Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. All right. So they went from 7 to 11. So now they're 11 deep. They got 11 estates that have separated from the United States government and formed the Confederacy of the United States. And then the last two, even though Europeans claim that they never legally succeeded on paper, would be Missouri and Kentucky. So let's get into the Emancipation Proclamation, because we were always told, if you're Generation X and you were born in the 70s, and we're the first generation to go to school with everybody, we were always told that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read the Emancipation Proclamation. And then we're going to go paragraph by paragraph, and we're going to get an understanding of what he really did. Because as we come to the close of the 400-year milestone, 1619 to 2019, I am convinced, again, I'm speaking from a being of fruition, not hope, not belief, not faith, not trust, but fruition. We have to pour gasoline and set fire to the nigger tradition. It's killing us. What is the nigger tradition? If you read the 12 steps, that's how we become mentally Americans and separate ourselves from that lower state that we've been operating in, which is the nigger mentality. How is it that you've been on this land for 400 years and most of us have never read the Emancipation Proclamation? Think about that for a minute, nigga. You were born into a group of people who were enslaved under this government, and most of us have never read any of the documents that pertain to our freedom. That's what makes us niggas. How do I ensure military occupation on foreign land with no revolution or no uprising? You dumb the people down. And see, this doesn't matter whether you a six-figure earner, still a nigga. You don't know your history on this land. You don't know the laws that freed your people. You still a nigga. Are you an officer of the court? You a sheriff? You a judge? You an attorney? You a lawyer? You an esquire? You still a nigga. If you don't know the documents that pertain to your people, quote unquote freedom, are you a dentist? Are you a doctor? Are you a business owner? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you self-employed? Are you unemployed? Are you homeless? Are you within one of the military branches, fighting for a United States government that may have never freed your people? It's that time, man. 400 years. How do you start off year 401? Burning down nigger traditions. It's killing us. Let's get into the Emancipation Proclamation. By the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. Whereas on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following, to wit: that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free, and the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom. That's paragraph 1 of the Emancipation Proclamation. Second paragraph. That the executive will, on the first day of January, aforesaid, by proclamation, designate the states and parts of states, if any, in which the people thereof, respectively, shall then be in rebellion against the United States. And the fact that any state or the people thereof shall on that day be, in good faith, represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of such state shall have participated, shall, in the absence of strong countervailing testimony, be deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people thereof are not then in rebellion against the United States. The third paragraph. Now, therefore, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, do on this first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, and in accordance with my purpose so to do publicly proclaimed for the full period of 100 days, from the day first above mentioned, order and designate as the states and parts of states wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States, the following to wit. The fourth paragraph. Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except the parishes of St. Bernard, the Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James Ashion, Assumption, Terrebonne, Laforche, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including the city of New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Prince Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and which accepted parts are for the present left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued. The fifth paragraph. And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. Sixth paragraph. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. Seventh paragraph. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And here we're going to finish up the Emancipation Proclamation. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution, upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed. Done at the city of Washington, this first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 87th, by the President Abraham Lincoln, Secretary of State William H. Seward. All right, I just read the Emancipation Proclamation, and you want to be honest with yourself if you're honest with nobody else. To thine own self be true. If that's your first time hearing the Emancipation Proclamation read in its entirety, look yourself in the mirror and say, I've been a nigga. Again, that document is directly attached to American descendants of slavery history and American Native Blacks history. Whether your ancestors were from a native nation on this land and became prisoners of war and brought into the legal construct of chattel slavery, or whether your people came from another land and were brought here and were put into the legal system of chattel slavery. What we all have in common is chattel slavery under the United States government. Now let's break this down, because when you read it out, if you're anything like me, you don't really see the plays that were done. So we're going to take this thing paragraph by paragraph and we're going to walk through it. Let's start off with the very first sentence of the proclamation. Whereas on the 22nd day of September in the year our Lord 1862, that sets the stage right there. Our Lord. See, the Lord that the European recognizes in their life ordains slavery. Now that sounds crazy for me to make that statement after reading the first sentence of the Emancipation Proclamation, because you heard the word slaves and you heard the word free, but you didn't hear or really understand what he said. Let's get into it. Ride with me. Let's travel. The first paragraph. What is he really saying in the first paragraph of the Emancipation Proclamation? Abraham Lincoln, in that first paragraph, he's saying persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state are in rebellion against the United States government. All right. That sounds good, right? If you're a person and you're in any state or a designated part of a state, you're in rebellion because you got slaves. All right. He also says in that first paragraph, these persons shall be forever free, and the executive government, including the military and naval, will recognize and maintain their freedom. So these people in these states will be forever free, and the executive government, let me ask y'all a question, people. How many branches of the government are under the United States government? It's 3. The executive branch is where the president resides. You have the judicial branch and you have the legislative branch. So you're only recognized to be free by the president. You're not recognized legislatively through Congress, and you're not recognized to be free judicially or legally through the Supreme Court. Did you see the play? Did you see the play? Including the military and naval will recognize and maintain their freedom. So my warlords will also recognize slaves to be free. Put a pin in that. The president will recognize it and the warlords will recognize it, from the military and the Navy. He didn't say anything about the judicial branch or the legislative branch recognizing us to be free. That's what he's saying in this first paragraph. The executive branch, military, and naval will do no acts to repress or stop efforts that may be made to obtain freedom. All right, so the president is saying, if you buck up against your slave owner in one of these slave states, I don't have a problem with that. And my military and my Navy is not going to have a problem with you bucking up against your slave masters or slave patrol trying to catch you making their 7 cents an hour as they comb through the night. We don't have any problems with that. That's what the first paragraph is saying. He's setting the stage. And it sounds good, but it's really not all that good. Let's go to the second paragraph. The second paragraph, what is he really saying? if your state is in rebellion and your state is represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections on that day, and no strong countervailing testimony is given, then your state isn't in rebellion against the United States government. He just gave the politicians an out. He just gave the politicians an out. You can have slavery in your state, but if your state is represented in Congress on that day and no strong countervailing testimony is given by that representative, then what Abraham Lincoln is saying, your state isn't in rebellion against the United States government. So you can have a full-blown operation of slavery, but if your representative comes up here to Congress on this particular day and doesn't argue or push back against what the United States government through the executive branch of the president is doing through the Emancipation Proclamation, then it's all good. You see the loophole? Third paragraph. Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy in time of actual rebellion against the United States government. Abraham Lincoln is letting it be known that in war times, I act as commander-in-chief. Not the king, but the commander-in-chief. What is the name of the leaders on this land that represents different nations of Native Americans? Chief. So what we understand is the president has two hats that he wears. He's the president of the corporation, and he's also, let me stop. On the public side, he's the president operating in commerce and doing business. On the private side, when it's time to get medieval and go to war, he acts as the commander-in-chief. Also in that third paragraph, those states have 100 days that are in rebellion to stop the madness. Okay? So in that third paragraph, he's speaking from a commander-in-chief standpoint, and he's talking to his warlords that are in the Army, and he's talking to his warlords that are in the Navy. And he's also given a 100-day time period for the states that are in rebellion. Now, the states that are in rebellion, they did not send a representative to Congress on that particular day, right? To just completely buck the United States government system, that means you sent no representative and you're harboring slaves. You with me? Fourth paragraph. Let's look at what did Abraham Lincoln exclude in the fourth paragraph. He's already given an out politically, saying that if your representative comes to Congress and doesn't buck against what we're doing, you're good. I'm not going to look at your state as being in rebellion. He also goes a step further and excludes a whole lot of areas and allows them to do whatever they've been doing. Let's look at who he excludes in the fourth paragraph. The parishes of St. Bernard are excluded. The Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James Ession, Assumption, Terrebonne, Laforche, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including New Orleans. All of that's excluded. So Abraham Lincoln basically saying, get it how you live. You're excluded. We're going to turn a back. We're going to turn a blind eye to whatever you got going on. You're exempt. Let's look at the other areas that were excluded under the Emancipation Proclamation in paragraph 4. Excluded 48 counties designated as West Virginia. So it's 48 counties in 1861 that made up the estate of West Virginia. So all of West Virginia, you good. You can do it how you want to do it. And also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth. So that's a whole lot of area. We talking about all of West Virginia, and we talking about certain areas within Virginia. Y'all good too. Y'all get it how you live. Whatever you got going on, we're not focusing on you. And accepted parts for the present left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued. So it's a whole lot of people that this proclamation doesn't even apply to y'all. Let's go deeper. Fifth paragraph of the Emancipation Proclamation. Slaves in stated states are free. The executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities, will recognize and maintain their freedom. This is a military operation, people, that was set up by Abraham Lincoln, the president and the commander-in-chief. The states that were mentioned, which we got 11 of them, he's saying that the executive government of the United States, which means the president, this has nothing to do with Congress, this has nothing to do with the Supreme Court. We're only talking about one branch, the executive branch. Abraham Lincoln will see you as being free. And his warlords will see you as free. The military and naval authorities will recognize and maintain your freedom. See the catch? Now, if you catch a court case in one of them states, I ain't got nothing to do with what the court do to you. If you waiting on Congress to pass some legislation to protect you in conjunction with what I'm saying as the president, I ain't got nothing to do with that either. All I'm talking about is if my warlords run up on you on a plantation, we got you. And if for some reason I got to get involved, I got you. But I can't speak for the judicial branch or the legislative branch. You on your own with Congress, you on your own with the Supreme Court. Let's go deeper. The sixth paragraph. This is where he spells out the terms of freedom. How you got terms of freedom? Let's get into it. The first term, abstain from all violence, unless in necessary defense. That's your first term to freedom, slave. Abstain from all violence unless in necessary defense. What's the next term? All cases allowed labor faithfully for reasonable wages. See, he slid it in real slick. I want to quote this verbatim. And I recommend to them that in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. Why is that important? That's important because, number one, the president is declaring you free from the executive branch. He's not saying that the judicial branch, which is the court system, is going to recognize you. And he's also not saying that the legislative branch, which is Congress, which is the House and the Senate, are going to recognize you as being free, right? Only my military and my naval and me as the president are going to recognize you, right? But then here's the catch and the icing on the cake. And this ties in with Dr. Claude Anderson always talks about, that we were locked and boxed and put at the basement within this social construct called the Constitution of the United States government. He didn't say that you can own anything. He said you're going to labor faithfully for reasonable wages. So I'm declaring your freedom, but you still got to eat. You still got to take care of your family. I ain't telling you you can own nothing. I'm telling you to labor faithfully for reasonable wages. This was a setup from the ownership class within the United States government. So if I'm operating a slave operating system within the state of Georgia, and Abraham Lincoln declares that slaves are free, understand one thing first of all. If I'm doing business in Georgia, I'm now under the Confederate States of America. So I'm under a different government. So your Emancipation Proclamation means nothing coming from a whole separate government. That's like you working for Walmart and the president of Home Depot tells you what, as a Walmart employee, what to do. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing with this Civil War scam. Abraham Lincoln is representing the United States government. He can't tell the Confederate States of America's government anything. So right there, the emancipation is irrelevant. But let's say I want to play along as a business owner, and I got an operation going on in Georgia. And the word gets out, slaves are free, and my slaves are starting to buck. Well, where you gonna go? I won't work you for free anymore. Now I'll pay you a reasonable wage. You ain't gonna own nothing, but I'll pay you a reasonable wage. You see what he did? He locked us in to the bottom of society. He didn't say that you can own and buy land and have people labor faithfully for you for reasonable wages. No, that's not what he said. What he said in the 6th paragraph is, and I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases, when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. You are to be a permanent employee. We're in 2019 right now. What are politicians talking about whenever they do take time to talk directly to American descendants of slavery, also known as American Native Blacks? What do politicians always tell us? They tell us that we're going to give you more jobs. We want you to labor faithfully for reasonable wages. You ain't owning shit. I apologize for that language, but we got to keep it real. Niggas have been running around bragging about an Emancipation Proclamation when Abraham Lincoln just set you up, but it gets better. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. Let's get into the 7th paragraph where we got more terms of freedom. So we got into the first 2 terms, no violence unless in necessary defense. And then all cases allowed, you're going to labor faithfully for reasonable wages. You ain't owning shit. You going to work though. You going to work and we'll give you a reasonable wage, but you ain't finna get rich off the wage. Hey, it's an upgrade from working for free as a slave. Abraham Lincoln, boy, I tell you. So let's get into paragraph 7, which is more terms of freedom. People of suitable conditions will be received into the armed services of the United States government to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. So as we bum rush these plantations, which they took a page out of the Black Seminoles playbook and out of the Maroon Nation playbook from Florida, because remember, we were doing that 100 years ago, bum rushing plantations to get our people back. So now the United States government, also known as the Union, they're going to bum rush the Confederate States plantations. And when they bum rush those plantations, they're going to take the healthy of those slaves and say, all right, we're going to give you a gun and we're going to train you. Now you're going to fight for the same government that enslaved you in the beginning. We're going to, if you're fit and of proper age, we are going to train you and put a gun in your hand, and you're going to fight for the same government that enslaved you. So they were able to kill off population that way. You didn't need a lot of recruits into the Union Army, into the Union Navy. You didn't need a lot of Europeans to sign up for this. Why? Because they were going to bum rush the plantations within the Confederate States, and they knew that when you take a man from the lowest state that a human being could operate in, which is a slave, and you give him the opportunity of arming him, and letting him go back at his former slave master, you committed the ultimate pimping on that group of people, because now you're fighting for the same government that enslaved you and excluded you from the Constitution and the first 12 articles. Wow. And then if you're too old for us to arm you and make you kill on behalf of the same government that enslaved you, then we will have you come to terms with your former slave owner, not to own anything, but now you're going to work for him and he's going to give you reasonable wages. They just locked you into a peasant status. You damned if you do, damned if you don't. You either going to work on the land for reasonable wages, or we're going to put a gun in your hand and we're going to let you kill off our enemy, which is other Europeans that have set up shop and want to do business a completely different way. We're going to let you do our dirty work for us, but you damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you won't be an ownership class under our system of oppression. But we will use your body to kill off our problem. And meanwhile, the owner of the plantation still remains the owner of the plantation, because even if you kill the owner of the plantation, Abraham Lincoln never told you can own a damn thing. So with you killing off that family on that plantation, guess what? They just bring another group of Europeans in and you got to work, you got to labor for them faithfully for reasonable wages. So here we are in 2019, November 25th. And if this is your first time hearing the Emancipation Proclamation, we're in the information age now, people. The days of going to the National Archives or going to an historic library, you can do that. But if you got a smartphone or any kind of computer, any kind of hand device, right? Desktop, laptop, cell phone, you can go to Google and you can pull up the PDF form of the Emancipation Proclamation and read it for yourself. And follow the breakdown paragraph by paragraph, and what you will come to see is that we were never freed. Free and liberty are two different things, and we didn't get neither one. Because if you're free, that means you can do, as a creator, as a lord, you can create your own domain. You weren't given that through that Emancipation Proclamation. You were given the authority by the president to buck up against your slave owner on the plantation. You ain't gonna own the plantation though. You can buck up against them for your freedom. But within your freedom, now that you're free, how you gonna make a living and take care of your family? Well, you gotta labor faithfully for reasonable wages. You ain't owning shit. And for those young adults that may be listening to this, I'm sorry, I just got to keep it real. We have way too many highly schooled, uneducated American blacks within this society as we speak in 2019, November 25th, that why is this not widely promoted? That Abraham Lincoln never freed slaves. What he did was gave you an option to fight for the United States government under his direct authority and the authority of the military and the naval branch of the military, right? But the legislative branch didn't recognize what he was talking about, and the judicial branch didn't recognize what he was talking about. So when you say Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, really? Did he really free them? Did he really free them, or did he use it? Did he use bodies to win a war? Those are extra bodies, the slaves. Give them the opportunity to take up arms. We ain't gonna let them own nothing. We're not gonna give them judicial freedom. We're not gonna give them legislative freedom, but give them the opportunity to take up arms and to kill their former master, and then they can feel a little bit better about themselves as they go back to that same plantation and work. Now you're not working for free. Now we'll give you a reasonable wage, and hopefully you will labor faithfully for that reasonable wage. That same concept, we all have family members that are in prison or either have done a lot of time in prison. Watch how the concept applies to modern day prison system. if you enslave a man for a period of time and keep him in a cage, at some point that man will be happy to get out of that cage and have a work detail. He will labor faithfully, but he's not getting reasonable wages. He's getting minimal to no wages. So when you can break a human being down by stuffing them down in the basement within a social construct of a government that even the idea that I can come out of the basement for 8 hours a day, that seems like freedom to that group of people, because you've already trained them to only jump so high within life. That's the nigga culture. That's the culture that I have burned and continue to burn on a daily, monthly, weekly, and yearly basis within my own personal life. And for me personally, before I close, it started over 14 years ago with embracing spirituality and universal principles and the supreme architect of the universe, and getting away from the nigga culture. And nigga culture, all of us that are American descendants of slavery, we're all familiar with it. You can't have a relationship with God in the nigga culture unless you go through Jesus and the church. What that did for me was it allowed me to build up the mental, emotional, and spiritual strength needed to walk away from it and embrace higher concepts and higher principles of operating on the earth plane. Walking away from the dogma, walking away from the historical reality that is your enemy's belief system. And when Abraham Lincoln says, "Our Lord," they're not talking about you, nigga. They're not talking about you. Their Lord gives them the right to do us the way that they've been doing us for 400 years. So we're ass backwards. It's like you've crossbreeded. I'm going to use a Willie Lynch term. You crossbreeded the donkey with the mule. Or is it the horse and the mule? And you get a jackass. Only a jackass would celebrate Native Americans' Holocaust, which is Thanksgiving. Only a jackass would celebrate St. Patrick's Day, Columbus Day, all these different holidays that Europeans have came up with. Only a jackass wouldn't stand their own people up and have their own holidays. Only a jackass of people wouldn't have a Marcus Garvey Day, a Malcolm X Day, a Dr. Carter G. Woodson Day, a Dr. Daniel Hale Williams Day, a day for all the black inventors within our... Only niggas would do what we're doing. And all I'm saying is 400 years, man. It's time to own our history and stop the nigga traditions. It's killing us. Literally, it's killing us. So when we say that reparations are needed, reparations mean a complete reset. A complete reset. Legislatively, judicially, and executively. All of it has to be reset. Why? Because it's propped up off of our being in the basement. Shout out to Dr. Claude Anderson that's been saying that in his book, The Black History Reader, 101 Questions That You Never Thought to Ask. Again, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Shout out to Dr. Umar Johnson with his bought and paid for schools debt free. And yet we still have niggas that won't support the education of the next generation. Shout out to Tone Talks, Yvette Carnell, Professor Black Truth, Tariq Nasheed, the Black Authority. There's a lot of different avenues that you can get information from, right? Minus the drama. And the reason why I say minus the drama, and I want to say this as well. If anybody wants to take these 12 steps or any of the information and put it on a bigger scale, feel free. I'm not claiming it. I've realized that we're prisoners of war and we're in last place under this government on this land. Why am I trying to get credit for something when we in last place? So if somebody wants to take these 12 steps and they want to take full, complete credit for it, I'm saying it on this video. You don't have any pushback from me. I'm not fighting with other prisoners of war. I'm not fighting or arguing with other prisoners of war. You have no power. Why am I fighting you? We know who we got to fight. We already know who we got to fight. So again, Dr. Claude Anderson, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart because you kept it real from a military standpoint when you always say that we are locked and boxed and that the Constitution is a social construct. I just read the Emancipation Proclamation. He didn't free us. He used us and put us in a permanent employee status. And it won't change legislatively through Congress until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which is after the Civil War. But giving Abraham Lincoln credit as if he did something, it was damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's where we are today under that eagle that represents the United States government. Left wing, right wing, Republican, Democrat, the bird needs to be shot. You just picking the lesser of two evils, which is Abraham Lincoln set the stage for. We're going to give you the lesser of two evils. You're going to labor faithfully for reasonable wages. You ain't owning nothing, or we'll give you a gun and let you go out there and kill yourself and kill somebody else at the same time so we can get the Union back and get these Confederate states back in line. How about that? With that being said, this is the week of the National Holocaust Day, which is known as Thanksgiving. Switch it up, man. Close out the 400 year. Make you some spaghetti. Go out, eat you some seafood, man. Leave that turkey and all that alone, man. If your people gonna get together, make it Dr. Claude Anderson Day or Dr. Carter G. Woodson Day. Don't say Happy Thanksgiving, because when you put those spells, when we continue to put those spells in the air, we keep ourselves in that nigger state. No different than when you represent Dade County, or if I want to bring it back to Atlanta real quick, when you represent I'm a Grady baby. Look up Grady. Look up Grady. We're in the information age. Look up, I believe his name is William Grady or Hardy Grady, but look up Grady. Everybody in the Atlanta area who represents the Grady babies, look up Grady and understand you're no different than the people that grew up in Florida representing Fort Lauderdale and Dade County, Broward County, Grady baby. Look the man up named Grady and look at what he stood for and what his thinking was, and you would no longer claim that you were Grady baby. But this is our problem. We've been put in a nigger state mentally. We got to recover. Dr. Umar Johnson, much respect to you. You touch on the mental aspect a lot. Shout out to you for having your debt-free schools. Hopefully our people will wake up and start supporting you so that you can get that thing off the road. I don't have his P.O. box written down in front of me. I know it's in Wilmington, Delaware, but shout out to you, brother, man. Same thing with Tone Talks and Yvette Carnell getting this political thing going. It's time, man. It's the games are over. We are in a horrible state. With that being said, we are the gods.